afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Well, 3 times is usually enough, but I'll go for good afternoon. It's a special pleasure to welcome you all to the Schemel Forum today, and equally a pleasure to introduce you to one of my best friends. I chose the 2023 spring semester lunch and seminar speakers with special care this year because I wanted to be sure that they would live up to my aim to bring the world to Scranton. The Schemel Forum has been in that business from the beginning, if you will, because we believe that people in small cities and rural areas should have the learning opportunities that in general come only in large urban areas. As a student, Sister Carol selected as her academic subject the Holocaust, and in particular, the study of people who helped the Jews and those who did not. Helping the Jews was as risky as fighting in the war. She has spoken on the subject on just about every continent. I don't know if there is an answer to the question she poses, why some people, mostly Christian, took on this very dangerous project, but it's important to ponder it, if we will. I had the privilege of working with Sister Carol on a conference on the subject at the State Department in Washington in 1988. Now we have her back. She may not be able to answer the question, but she is well prepared to introduce you to the people who did have the courage to care. Please welcome her to the podium.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure for me to be here today. First of all, because I've seen some former students of mine, if you can believe it. I started my teaching career at what was Dunmore Central Catholic High School. But then it was named after one of the bishops, and then when they fell in disrepute, they named it out of one of the, I don't know, the Holy Spirit or something high school. Anyhow, out there on Dunmore and Drinker Street. So thanks very much. My presentation this afternoon is divided into several parts. The first will allow me to say a few words about Sandra Myers, to say just how important she has been for me as a friend, a mentor, and a collaborator on various projects. And we're still collaborating on projects. The second will give me an opportunity to make a few comments about the Holocaust, Nazi Germany's attempt during the Nazi era and World War II to murder every Jew in Europe. And also to say a bit about those extraordinary, ordinary people who tried to help and rescue Jews during the Holocaust. And in the third part, I'll show you a short documentary film, The Courage to Care, leaving some time for questions and answers and comments from you before we conclude. So I'm happy, very happy, to be leading off the Spring 2023 Schemel Forum series, because as I said, it gives me an opportunity to draw attention to Sandra Myers and her extraordinary work as a community activist, a cultural influencer, a public intellectual, and a collaborator with me on so many wonderful projects over the years. A big project we collaborated on was the international conference that Sandra referenced a few moments ago. We did this with the late Elie Wiesel and the United States Holocaust Memorial Council, predecessor to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. Sandra said it was 1988, but it was 1984 that we did that. And that conference was called Faith in Humankind, Rescuers of Jews During the Holocaust. It was the basis for a book. I have a photo of the book up there, and here's a copy of the book, which was published in 1986. Believe it or not, it's still in print at New York University Press. And this conference, Faith in Humankind, Rescuers of Jews During the Holocaust, was the basis for the 1986 Academy Award nominated short documentary, The Courage to Care. And we went to the Academy Awards, Sandra and I, accompanied by Maury. So this brings me to part 2 of my presentation, the Holocaust and the Rescue of Jews. The Holocaust was one of the most brutal chapters in all of human history. It was the planned, systematic attempt by Hitler and the Nazis to annihilate all the Jews of Europe and to eradicate every vestige of Jewish life and culture from the European continent. It was a crime unprecedented in human history. Others, of course, have found mass annihilation expedient. They have left their bloody fingerprints on the history of the 20th century. But the Nazis stand alone in utilizing modern science and technology for the process of destruction. They also stand out in their calculated, clear resolve to destroy the Jews, not because they were a political threat or an economic drain, but simply because they were Jews. The Nazi assault constituted an unprecedented mobilization of the resources of the state to single out a people for extinction. All Jews everywhere in Europe were unconditionally targeted for death. No Jew was exempt. As night descended, millions of other peoples were also swept into the Nazi net of death. Among these other victims were Poles, Roma and Sinti, or as we have previously called them, Gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, homosexuals, the mentally and physically disabled, and political dissidents. The magnitude of the destruction had no precedent in human history. Had World War II in Europe not ended when it did, or had Nazi Germany triumphed, there is evidence that the Jews may not have remained the final victims of the Nazi genocide, but they were certainly its first. Yet even a time as hopeless as the Holocaust, one could find a few good and decent people, men and women, who could not stand by while Jews were bullied, persecuted, hunted down, or doomed to death in the ghettos, in the concentration and death camps of German-occupied Europe. At great risk to themselves, these people took action, which saved a life, or many lives. This is what the film you will see in a few minutes is all about. It's about people who had the courage to care about what was happening to others. Erwin Staub, himself a survivor of the Holocaust, who became a well-known scholar of the Holocaust, called such people active bystanders. And by an active bystander, he meant a person, someone who interrupts a potentially harmful situation. That person had a choice and an opportunity to act on that choice. They were a very small minority, they were a very small minority, not at all representative of the attitudes and responses of most non-Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II and the Hitler era. They highlight the question and the issue of choice. That is, the power of a person to choose an option when faced with the question, whose side am I on? Active bystanders don't just happen, they evolve. Some passive or complicit witnesses change and join evildoers, while others do just the opposite. You'll see that in the actions of Marion Pritchard, a young Dutch woman during World War II and the Holocaust. Instead of joining the perpetrators, people like Marion Pritchard responded to the suffering of others and helped those in need. You know, murder and mayhem do not just happen. Neither do resistance or rescue. Choices and decisions are involved in how people act and react to what is happening around them. People might make choices and decisions with or without reflection, but they do make them. We all do. And people do decide, we all do, whose side they are on, the victims or the perpetrators. As Elie Wiesel says, let us not forget, after all, that there is always a moment when the moral choice is made. In a situation like the Holocaust, people did choose Hitler and the fatherland, Nazi Germany, or freedom and humanity. Erwin Staub, I referred to him a few moments ago, argues that to understand evil, we must first understand goodness. To condemn, we must first be able to praise. We know from eyewitnesses and survivor testimonies that between 1933 and 1939, while most governments and individuals in Europe and elsewhere looked the other way, tens of thousands, perhaps even millions of people in Nazi Germany were involved in persecuting, harassing, and after 1939 in the outbreak of World War II, rounding up, ghettoizing, deporting, transporting, concentrating, and murdering 6 million Jews in the heart of so-called Christian Europe. At the same time, a relatively small number of non-Jews, small given the overall population of Europe, perhaps about 700 million at that time, found the moral courage to shelter thousands of Jews who were the targets of Nazi hatred and persecution. During the Holocaust, it was as easy for people to say the Jews are a problem as it was to say the Jews are not my problem. In fact, many people said the Jews have nothing to do with me or mine or us. I have my own family, myself, to worry about. But some people could not say such things. They could not join in persecuting and harassing Jews, much less torturing and murdering Jews. They could not turn their backs on the Jewish people, men, women, and children, who were being hunted down all over German Nazi-occupied Europe. Some people had to act. They had to do something to help the despised, vulnerable, isolated, frightened Jews. Why? Because as Emmanuel Tanai said, he's in the film also that you will see, he was helped by Polish Christians during the Holocaust. Emmanuel Tanai said that's the kind of people they were. What did Tanai mean? For sure, the people who helped Jews were not angels or saints. If you've seen the film Schindler's List, Steven Spielberg makes it clear that Oskar Schindler is not a saint, that's for sure. The Gentiles, many were Christian, but not all, who tried to resist the Nazis in their death project, who tried to help the Jews during the Holocaust, were ordinary human beings. It's very important to remember that. They were ordinary human beings. Like the Nazi perpetrators, who were neither devils nor monsters, but ordinary human beings as well. Rescuers lived in the same moral sphere as the other 700 million people who walked the footpaths and the streets of occupied Europe. They breathed the same air, had the same fears, faced the same challenges as did other people in Nazi-occupied Europe. It is a mistake to make the perpetrators other than what they were, ordinary human beings. And it is a mistake to make the righteous more than what they were, ordinary human beings. For it allows us to say, I'm not like them. I'm just an ordinary person, neither a monster nor a perpetrator, nor a saint. I am neither capable of killing, like the perpetrators, nor of helping, like the righteous. We must not make either the perpetrators or the rescuers larger than life. Rather, we must keep them as what they were, life size during a time when humanity was diminished. It is important for us to remember this. That's why Elie Wiesel insists we must know about these good people who helped Jews during the Holocaust, and we must learn from them. The story of people who helped Jews is not simply the tale of a single noble act of letting someone or many into one's house for a few days, or of hiding Jews in one's barn for a few weeks or even months. Rather, the story of helpers and rescuers during the Holocaust is the story of a continuous struggle against enormous odds to save one or more Jews, men, women, and children, old and young, rich and poor, agreeable or disagreeable. Not even all Jews were saints. As of January 2022, 28,217 non-Jews have been honored by Yad Vashem in Jerusalem for helping Jews during the Holocaust. Now, why do I mention Yad Vashem? Yad Vashem is the Israeli memorial established to memorialize those Jews who died during the Holocaust. And when the law was passed, and it is a law, the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, in 1951, I believe it is, passed the law for Yad Vashem, to establish Yad Vashem, which is a huge memorial and research center. One of the obligations of Yad Vashem, by law, by Israeli law, is to seek out and find those non-Jews who helped Jews during the Holocaust. To be recognized by Yad Vashem as a righteous Gentile, it's almost like being canonized a saint. I mean, they are very strict on, I can't just say, oh, well, I rescued Jews, I helped Jews. No, I can't say that. A Jewish person who is helped has to testify to that. And then it is investigated to be sure it wasn't done for any self-seeking reason, but to help Jews in their time of need. What do we know about these good people? What we know is that these good people rescued the concept of the human being as a being capable of choice, even in the midst of a despairing situation and against the most improbable odds. We also know that they made concrete the Talmudic phrase, whoever saves a single life is as one who has saved the entire world. What else do we know? We know that neither gender, nor age, nor nationality, nor education, nor profession, nor economic class, nor religious learning, nor political persuasion played a determining role as to who would be a rescuer. Whereas most people surrender personal responsibility for their actions when these actions are dictated by an authority figure, the rescuers of Jews did not do that. Why not? Most studies indicate that as children, in a very significant number of cases, and Eva Fogelman, for example, in her book, Conscience and Courage, it's an excellent book, has researched and investigated this. We know that many of these rescuers were raised in homes where love was in abundance, where parents were altruistic and tolerant, and where children were disciplined by reason and explanation, and where they were taught 5 essential principles: that human beings are basically the same, and differences between them are to be respected; that the world is not divided into us and them, but rather contains a common bond of humanity; that they should have a clear sense of right and wrong, should stand up for their beliefs, have moral integrity, self-confidence, and self-worth; that kindness and compassion toward others should be practiced, and that they should be of independent mind, self-sustaining, and never follow the crowd. The actions of the righteous during the Holocaust constitute a vivid and powerful communal memory bank that can help to liberate us from that paralyzing excuse, "There's nothing that I can do," and can encourage us to acknowledge and embrace a foundational motivation for human behavior: concern for the other. Perhaps the most important thing we know about the rescuers, that they were and are absolutely ordinary human beings, people like us. To view them as heroes beyond our reach is to run the risk of becoming a passive admirer, a passive bystander, as it were. Although exemplary, the rescuers faced the same fears we face when confronted with choices that could put our lives in jeopardy. If we want to mend the world, we must listen to the voices of good people and not just to the voices of evil people. Therefore, let us listen to the righteous as attentively, accurately, and completely as we can in order to learn from them, so we can make real again and again acts of compassion when people's lives are in danger and we are in a position to help them. Now let's watch the film, The Courage to Care. I'll be interested in your comments and questions afterward. Now I hope I can make this work. Sorry, just a minute.
Some killed, others helped the killers, or made believe that they didn't know. The large majority was apathetic, unconcerned, uninvolved, indifferent. And the victims died not only because of the killers, they died because of the indifference of the others. Let us not forget, after all, that there's always a second when the moral choice is made. And even in those times when the dictatorship, the police, the terror were unprecedented, German soldiers everywhere, collaborators everywhere. Even then there were people, men and women, young and old, rich and poor, who simply said, no, we won't do it. We'll open the door, we'll take in someone and help, So it is possible for the human being alone, often alone, to say no to death.
There were 13,000 who were taken during the 3 days, 14th, 15th, 16th of July. Of these 13,000, most of them were women and children. When they came for a roundup, some of the women with their children, some of the women jumped out the window. There were 51 suicides of that kind. Mothers jumped out the windows with their children rather than be taken. I was 7, and we lived on the first floor in an apartment. I lived with my mother. My father was a prisoner of war, and my mother was active in the resistance. Things were dangerous. The concierge of the house she lived downstairs, and there was a kind of corridor between her apartment and the front door. And about 5 o'clock in the morning, she ran up and yanked us out of bed and said, "They're coming for you." And she drew us quickly into her apartment and put us, my mother and me, into a closet, a broom closet. So when the search team came in and they asked for us, she said, "Oh, you know how Jews are. They live in poor places like that, but they all have money and they have a country house, and they've gone up to their country house." And they went for it. In the meantime, of course, standing there, I had two feelings. One of them was, how can she say such terrible things about Jews or about us? But on the other hand, that wasn't a strong feeling. The real strong feeling was, I was safe. If she was taking care of things, she was taking care of things. She had, this conviction that I was her charge and she was going to protect me, and that was that. Marie's husband, who was called by everybody Monsieur Henri, he was fetched from his job, and he took me. I was 7, and we walked outside and they were German soldiers right outside. I remember that, and he held my hand, and I was trembling, or my hand was shaking some, and there were trucks full of Jews being rounded up. And he told me, and I remember that it was like the refrain from the whole occupied Paris wartime to children was, look at your feet and keep on walking. It's like a slogan throughout the war, and he said the same thing. And he said, look at your feet, keep on walking. If anybody calls you, don't answer. Don't look up, don't answer. So we walked like that, nobody called. And I looked at my feet, and we reached the subway entrance. And I remember a wonderful sense of safety going down underground into a subway.
On my way to classes at the School of Social Work, and there was this small home for orphans and other children who weren't being taken care of, and it was a Jewish home. And as I went by, they had a truck out there, and they were loading the children in the truck, and the children were upset, of course, and they didn't climb in fast enough, and the Germans picked them up wherever they could reach them, arm, leg, whatever, and threw them into the truck. And it's funny, I've told this story about 6 times now, but I still have trouble with it. There were 2 other women coming down the street, and they attacked the Germans who were doing it, and they threw them in the truck too. and I just sat there. But that was when I decided that if there was anything at all I could do to prevent any of this, I was going to do it. I guess it was somewhere in 1943, I was asked to take care of 3 children and their father. The youngest was about a week old at the time, and the others were 2 and 4. We moved into a house out in the country about 20 miles east of Amsterdam, and we just trusted and prayed that that would work. We had a hiding place in the living room. We could get him in there and the whole business covered up in about 30 seconds. This particular night, 4 Germans came, led by a Dutch policeman whom I'd known all my life because I knew that area very well. I've spent holidays there since I was 2 years old. And they didn't find the hiding place. But the Germans often would come, and if they didn't find the hiding place, they learned to come back an hour later, because by that time you would have let people come out of the hiding place if it wasn't one where people were all the time. But the children were in too that night, and the baby began to cry, and I let them out after about half an hour after the Germans left. And then this Dutchman came back, and I had a small revolver that another friend of mine had given me just in case, but that I had never planned to use. And I felt that I had no choice except to kill him. And I'd do it again under the same circumstances, and it still bothers me. And there should have been another way, but I couldn't think of anything else to do. The local undertaker was very helpful, and he put the body in a coffin with somebody else. And they had a big family funeral, and they didn't know they were burying 2 bodies. The policeman was local, and everybody hated him, all the people who were against the Germans. And if they had, I think that if somebody had really tried hard to find out how and where he died, they could have, but thank God they didn't, so I did sweat it out for quite a long time.
I worked serving breakfast, luncheons, and dinner to the German officers and secretaries. But only one thing. Behind that hotel, there was a ghetto. And I first time realized what was happening to the Jewish people. I did see the death march. They pushed them like cattle through the middle of town. I did see old men look to me, rabbi, with a white beard, white hair, and most of all, the children, all sizes, all ages. The little one was screaming, crying, "Mama, Mama!" And the bigger one, they were even scared to cry. On one thing I remember, the eyes, a big, scary, looking, searching, like asking, what did I do? What did I do? So then I pray and promise I will help. Then the plant did have to move farther to Tarnopol. There I did the same work, serving breakfast, luncheons, and dinner to the officers, secretaries, and also the local head of Gestapo. I spoke quite good German, and serving, I was able to overhear conversation. And the major gave me another job to take care of the laundry for the officers. There I met 12 Jewish people. We become good friends. But when the time comes for the total liquidation of ghetto, those 12 did not have place to go. And you know, next day in the morning, the major called me to his office and he said, Irene, I would like you to be my housekeeper. Well, when I did go see the villa, the Lord made a decision. I mean, without planning or doing anything more. I put those 12 in the cellar and kept them there. And in September, I was in town. And all of a sudden, the Gestapo was pushing the whole people from the street to the marketplace. And there, we did have to witness Polish family be hung together with the Jewish family, middle of the market street. And we did have to stay and watch to be a warning what happened when you befriended a Jew. When I came home, I locked the door like I do usually, but I usually leave the key turned in a lock so if the major would come unexpectedly, he could not open. But I was so shook up. So I locked the door. I even locked it, but I pulled the key. I came to the kitchen, and there were Ida, Fanka, Clara, Miriam. The women came out, because that's what they usually did, to help me. I was white like a snow, so they asked me what's happened. I said, nothing, I don't feel good. I could not tell them. What could they do? We're talking, and the door opened, and the major was standing in front of us. I still can see his chin shaking, his eyes with unbelief, and we were all frozen like statues. And he turned around in silence and he walked to his office. I did have to go and face him. There was no any other way. He yelled at me, he said, Irene, how could you do it? I trust you. I give you such a nice home, protection. Why? I said, I know only one thing. They're my friends. I did have to do it. I did not have a home to take them to my home. I don't have a family. Forgive me, but if I would do it again, so nobody has right to kill and murder because of religion or race. He said, you know what can happen to you? I said, yes, I know, I just witnessed. By the time I was crying, you know, I could hardly talk. And he said, yes, I witnessed that. And he said to me, look, I cannot do that to you. I cannot just let you die. And when he said that, believe me, I kneel down and I kiss his hand. Not for me, but for those people. They were alive and they did have hope.
I lived in this small town called Mierhof. My parents realized that the ghetto was now most likely going to be liquidated. So my parents did arrange through friends for me to go to a monastery located in just on the outskirts of Krakow called Mogiła. And no one knew there in the monastery that I was a Jew, except for the prior. I was in that monastery until someone denounced me as a Jew and the Gestapo came. And that very night, instead of sleeping in my room in the monastery, I did hide in an organ, and in the middle of the night the Gestapo came in, broke down the door to my room, and I could hear it, and I escaped from the monastery and hooked up with some other people. Jews suffered, Poles suffered too. One needed to really have a tremendous will to survive, have a resourcefulness to do so, and have many people help you. Let me give you an example. I was in a village. I still didn't have papers, and I went to make a telephone call. And the telephone was in the house of the village elder. And as I was there, police came in, and since there were partisans in the area, they asked me to raise my hands, and they searched my pockets. And as they were searching me, one looks at the other, says, "You know, this kid looks like a Jew." And I began laughing and said, "You know, well, that's quite a compliment you made, gentlemen." And so they began laughing too, and it was a joke. But then they realized that I had no documents, and that would lead to having to take me to nearby town, to jail, and that would be the end of me. And I said, "No, I live here. I just forgot my documents in this place where I live." And the village elder, he was asked, "Do you know this kid?" Oh, he says, sure, I know him. He is the son of so-and-so. And, oh, well then he has no documents. There'll be a fine of whatever it was, 20 zloty. And he says, "Sure, I'll pay it." He just produced 20 zloty, and that's it. Oh, here was a very, someone I didn't know, who didn't know who I was and what, but he was just helping.
It was a normal village. It is a small village on the mountains. My husband preached in a big church. It is a big church because that place is a Protestant town. And he always thought he has to preach for peace, for better love and understanding.
My father was not what you would call a ruler or a leader in the sense that he didn't tell people what to do. But I think his message was so strong, what he had to tell the people that really they ought to do in a situation that was such a disaster. I think this message carried over so well that it became like an infection, and it inspired the community. Maybe some people who normally wouldn't have done anything like hiding a persecuted person found that, yes, they could do it.
We never imagined what would happen with the Jews in France. But little by little realized that the Germans, having crossed the border and being at Paris, that the danger was there because already they started to persecute the Jews. And in my house one day, a poor woman came at night and she asked to come in. And she said that she was a Jew immediately, and that she was hiding, and that she was running away, and that she wanted to have a shelter, and she thought that with the minister's house she could perhaps find somebody who could understand her. And I said, "Come in." And so it started.
But this was a phenomenon that spread all over the area in the next villages, in Issaingeau, in Le Mazet, which are villages which are really a few miles away from us.
Or you cannot know how people knew that they could have perhaps a good place in our town. I cannot tell you what happened in the other houses because Jews were little by little all over the place. I was told that the Gestapo was taking away young people. I was in my kitchen. It was early in the morning. I had an apron. So when I arrived, the Gestapo thought I was a maid of the house. They let me in. I sat in the kitchen. I tried to go in the dining room where all the students were aligned. And my cousin, Daniel Tropmé, was the first one in the corner. And then the Gestapo screamed, they kicked me out. But they didn't kick me out of the house. I could go in the kitchen. So it meant that there was a maid, there was somebody belonging to the house. And when I saw all those boys passing to go in a little room where there was a man with a booklet with many names, and he was interviewing them one by one. And most of them who went through said, or had a little bit of paper saying, send this to my mother. Here's the address of my father. This is my fiancé. I have some money in my room. And when my young son came with me for the moment when they left, he didn't want me to go alone. And he was so upset to see those Gestapo beating one of those Jews. They were in line, coming down, going to the trucks, beating that young boy and saying, Schweinjude, Schweinjude. And then when I saw all those young people get in, and my cousin saying, do not worry, tell my parents that I was very happy here. It was the best time of my life. Tell them that I like traveling, that I go with my friends. And when they left, my son was green, I would say, I don't know, like a sick boy. And he said, Mother, I'm going to revenge later. Such things cannot happen again. I'm going to do something when I'm grown up. And I said, but you know what your father says. If you do such a thing, somebody else is going to revenge against you. And that is why we never finished. We are going to go on and on. We must forgive, we must forget and do better. He was silent and we left. And Daniel never came back.
What is so moving about all of them is that they do not see themselves as crusaders. For them it was a natural thing to save people, to remain human. And they didn't know it, but in doing so, they changed.
If I had not been saved by this woman, I know precisely what my fate would have been. I would have ended up in the gas chamber at Birkenau, because all the children were taken. And 95% of the Jewish children in Paris that day were taken. So only 5% were saved. They were all taken into the gas chamber at Birkenau. None survived. So my fate is very clear. So I know very clearly, that it was a question of saving life, a life, absolutely.
To be a rescuer under these circumstances, it took a unique person, someone who had a deep-seated conviction. Maybe not, that person wasn't that articulate to put it in those words, but they had a deep-seated conviction that they had to do it. And they were not people who were making choices on reflection. They just simply had to do it because that's the kind of people they were.
How can you refuse them? You don't sit down and say, I'm going to do this and that. You had no time to think. When a problem came, you had to solve it immediately. Sometimes people like you ask me, how did you take a decision? There was no decision to take. Are you thinking that we are all brothers or not? Are you thinking that it is unjust to be against the Jews or not? Then let us try to help.
I think that we all have memories of times that we should have done something and we didn't. And it gets in your way during the rest of your life.
Remember that in your life you will be across lots of circumstances that will need a kind of courage, a kind of decision of your own. Not about other people, but about yourself. I would not say more.
to questions or comments. Yes, please. Would you identify yourself, please?
Sure, Pat McDonald. Oh, thanks. Is this on? Oh, good. That incident with Irene raises an interesting question. That major spared her. I don't know what happened to her friends. She was hiding. But is there any record of any German officers or German soldiers that, kind of did the right thing?
You can actually, if you, excuse me, if you Google Yad Vashem, the Committee on the Righteous, they have a listing of everyone who has been honored, and there are a few. By a few, I'm talking 2 or 3 or 4 who have been honored, German soldiers who have been honored by Yad Vashem as people who tried to help the Jews during the Holocaust. Plus, this isn't so much about helping the Jews during the Holocaust, but if you're familiar with the book Ordinary Men by Christopher Browning, it's about a German police battalion. They were older men who were drafted into the German army, and they were kind of behind the frontline troops, and they were involved in mass execution of Jews. Browning records that they were given these police who were drafted into these police battalions. I think it's Battalion 101, if I have the number correct, were given a choice to participate in the mass executions or not to. By a few, I'm talking 2 or 3, chose not to participate. Nothing ever happened to them. They were simply transferred to other work. So there are some incidences of German soldiers who tried to help Jews or didn't participate in mass executions. Yes, please.
I was wondering
Would you identify yourself?
David Falk. What was your thoughts or impressions of the Ken Burns series on America during the Holocaust?
Say that again.
What were your thoughts or impressions of the Ken Burns series on PBS about America during the Holocaust?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic series, and one that should be viewed by as many people as can view it, and it should be used in schools with age-appropriate, of course, level schools.
Does it raise any concerns for you?
Obviously, it raises concerns for you, so why don't you tell us what they are?
Well, it's... well, I'm not... I just remembered the title of the Sinclair Lewis book, It Can Happen Here. What do you... do you think that Americans would be any different than the Europeans should something along those lines ever occur?
No. I don't think Americans are any different. I don't want to get into politics, but we certainly have political leaders who are using language that demeans others, whether it's Jews. We had a gubernatorial candidate in this state, Jews or gays or immigrants, even women. We see where that we have political candidates or even people who have been elected, sports figures, major sports figures, other commentators on television who have demeaned people, and we don't have a lot of people speaking up. We have a young man who, from this area, a graduate of this university, who has started a right-wing, extreme right-wing media site that is demeaning of people, and I doubt very much that, well, I wrote a letter to the editor about that and how there's not a lot of people speaking out against that. Religious leaders of any, I'm speaking of Christian religious leaders of any tradition, speaking against that, or university presidents speaking against that. So, yes, please.
Donna Smith. This film is very moving. And
speak into the mic.
It's very moving. And I just wondered, is it something that is being shown in, I don't know if it's middle school or high school now, like when they start reading Anne Frank, should they read this? Because it worries me when I see these statistics that when they interview some college students on the street and they ask them if they know what Auschwitz was, they have no idea. And I think something like that, it could be forgotten. And it allows Puffy Combs or whoever to say it never happened today. Yeah.
Well, actually, this film has been used widely. It's been shown on television, and I recently just made the suggestion to Carla McCabe, the head of WVIA, I said perhaps WVIA might like to show this during the time of Yom HaShoah, which is right after Passover, Easter, and I actually developed, with Sandra, we developed some simple educational tools that were distributed widely. I know that the film has been used widely in middle schools and high schools. It's on I grabbed this down from Facing History and Ourselves, which is an excellent website, educational website, on how to teach about the Holocaust, other genocides, about democracy. So yes, it is being used. Pennsylvania is a state in which it is recommended that there be teaching about the Holocaust and other genocide. I forget if it's 13 or 18, don't hold me to the number here, states in this country that have mandated teaching about the Holocaust. So it's going on, but the teaching is uneven. That's what I would say. And teachers are unprepared in a sort of uneven way. Sandra?
Tell them about Hollywood.
Like what would you like me to do? Why don't you come up and tell them?
It was, it was nominated for an Academy Award.
Oh yes, the film. This film was nominated for an Academy Award in the short documentary category. I mentioned at the beginning in my opening comments that Sandra and I actually went to Los Angeles with Maury, and he got a limo to take us to the Academy Awards. And we walked down the red carpet, and I walked behind someone who had feathers in all the appropriate places, and that was about all. But it is widely used. We got a lot of national publicity with this film, and I'm still, teachers will still tell me, oh, I use the film, and and hopefully WVIA will show it. And there's actually two films that Sandra and I had our hand in. One is The Courage to Care. The second is, by the way, this is a 30-minute film. It was made deliberately. Sandra's like, less is more, and she's right. It can be used in a classroom. If you have a 60-minute film, like the multiple 3-hour Ken Burns film, you've got to show it in segments. This you can show the whole film, you can teach up to it, you can show it, and you still, in many classrooms, you can still have 8 or 10 minutes to kind of teach, to let students kind of debrief or ask questions or whatever. So there's The Courage to Care about non-Jews who rescued Jews. And the second comes out of a conference, an international conference that I presented the idea to Elie Wiesel, and again what we had in Washington. It's called Triumph of Memory. It's about non-Jews who were victims of the Nazis. And, people will say, for example, they'll say, well, you think you suffered? Well, I'm Polish, or I'm Slovak, or I'm French, or I'm German, or whatever. I wasn't Jewish, and I suffered too, and it's true. As Emmanuel Tanai says, not only Jews suffered, he says Poles by which he means Catholic Polish people, also suffered. But when you see this film, Triumph of Memory, about non-Jews, you see that many of them had the opportunity to, like Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, if they would have pledged allegiance, or homosexuals, if they would have had sexual relations with the opposite sexual person, they could have gotten out of concentration camps. Jehovah's Witnesses stayed true to their faith, and they wouldn't pledge allegiance to Hitler. Jews had no possibility. It wasn't like somebody said, "Hey, Hitler, I'm on your side now. I support you." No. Jews had to be gotten rid of because they infected the so-called Aryan German race. So Triumph of Memory is also, it's a wonderful film. There's a Norwegian resistance fighter, a French resistance fighter, a woman who was she was a Soviet prisoner of war in Auschwitz. I forget what the other, because I haven't looked at it for a while, but so I have suggested to Carla that maybe they would show these films and, publicize it to schools ahead of time so they could be used in classrooms. Other questions or comments? Well, I want to say thank you. And
thank you, Carol. I can't say enough. I'm very happy and proud that we started off this fall this way, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye-bye.
thank you. Pardon?
I said hello.
Wait, hang on
That's all I
1 minute.
said. I just want to say that was a very powerful presentation.